I had a lot of people comment on this hair when I posted it on Instagram, sending me messages, responding to my Instagram stories about hurry up and get the video posted to the service. So if you're wanting to see the video to this modernized 2000s chunky foil, then keep watching to see how we created this look. If you want to follow me on Instagram, you can follow me at Christy@thecottage. Here's my client's hair. It actually looks a little bit lighter than it is in real life, but her hair is probably like a natural level 2 or 3. It's very, very dark. To start with my client, we're going to go right up at the top of her hairline in her bang area. We're not going to do the typical hairline foil that I normally do all the way around her head, but we're just going to do right at the top of her like bang area just to get that processing because her hair is so dark. She does want it to have a little bit more of a rooty vibe to it, so we're not going to be taking the foils up directly against her hairline. That way she'll have a little bit more freedom with not feeling like she needs to come in immediately like in 6 weeks having a harsh grow out. She did say that she wants to have pretty bright blonde on her face. So I am going to take these little diagonal sections down off of her part. That way she gets a lot of brightness framing her face, but it's going to be underneath the part and kind of diagonally away from it. So she is going to be very bright, but it's going to fall underneath the rest of her hair, so she won't have the appearance of grow out. To make sure that I always get the best blend, I always do zigzag partings and then also weave and back comb on top of it. And I feel like that's the best way to make sure that you have a really soft blend. You don't have any harsh lines within the hair when you're painting. So if you feel like doing balayage, if you feel like you have a hard time blending out lines, for me that just makes it so much easier, and it kind of like ensures that I'm going to have a good blend and that I'm not going to have any harsh lines or anything created in the hair when I comb the hair back out. Okay, now we're going to be getting into a different foil placement than what I normally do. So she parts her hair straight down the center, so that's kind of how we do our mohawk section if you were to do like a regular partial foil. So I'm taking a pretty thick section directly behind her hairline foils that we did, and I'm going to weave it and then back comb it pretty heavy. And I want to try to push the back comb as tight up to the scalp as I can, because I do want to get the foils up there pretty close, but I want to have that cushion of the back comb just to give me a little bit of softness right at the roots. And I'm going to flip that forward. I'm just going to take maybe like a 1/4 inch of a subsection, and that's going to be our dimensional pieces. Clip that forward and then go through and do like another thick weave, and we're going to continue that and back comb that, and that again is going to be our next section of like the typical chunky foils. And I don't know if any of you guys have done hair like in the early 2000s, but that's like my generation. And so you'd go through and do like even sometimes like 3 foils, 3 slices back to back to get those super extreme chunkiness foils that people were really liking, and it was super trendy. So for here, if you do a slice or a weave, I would honestly probably recommend doing a weave, however heavy you want to do it, but back comb it really good and try to get it as close to the root as possible. That back comb is going to create a nice cushion that it's only going to have like a few hairs that is getting painted directly at the root because you backcombed it so nicely. And then as you comb the cushion out, it's gonna blend down. So even if you feel like you're kind of worried about doing like a really heavy foil, you can see from our after picture that it actually blends really nicely from root to getting brighter through the ends. So I feel like this is the best way to go about modernizing like the chunky foils. And you could even do like 2 weaves back to back if you are kind of concerned of feeling like it's too heavy or not going to blend very well. And then always make sure that you're doing like a 1/4 inch to like 1/2 inch of a subsection in between to make sure that you're keeping those darker dimensional pieces in between the balayage. And that's going to give you like those high contrast looks that people are starting to want to have their hair done now, with those lots of dimensional, kind of more of that strappy blonde look, but they just kind of want it more blended now versus when it was just such like a huge chunk that people were doing back in the 2000s. The nice thing about this look is that you can really cater it to what your client wants and how much dimension they want. So if somebody wants like a very chunky, very high contrast, very bright blonde, but very dark sections of their natural hair, you could do like 2 weaves back to back with no subsection in between. And that would give you like that very blended, but at the same time, very blonde, like ribbon on top of like the dark subsection, and then do like a very large subsection in between, like maybe an inch and a half of a subsection. That way you'll get like a very defined blonde ribbon of color, but then you'll also have a very dark chunk like right next to it of the natural. And then if you do maybe like 2 or 3 of those double foils of like a weaved blonde like right on top of each other, you'll have really big pieces of blonde. But if somebody wants like, if they want to have a lot of contrast but they want it to be a little bit more subtle, then you could kind of do what I'm doing, even do like smaller sections or maybe not as many blonde pieces, or even like more of a baby light instead of just a typical weave. And just make sure that you're like, I'm feathering it like maybe an inch into the root, but you could even feather it not as heavy, like maybe start at the midsection of the hair and like really lightly feather it up into the roots and then paint it heavier down through the ends, where I'm doing it pretty solid up into the root area, and then maybe like a 1/2 inch away from the root is where I'm starting to feather it, just to kind of make it extra soft at the root section. So definitely play with this look. You can really cater it to every client and however much dimension or contrast they're wanting. Just make sure you do a thick enough subsection in between, because the idea of this is that if they want to have a lot of dimension, then you want to make sure you're doing a large enough subsection in between all the blonde foils. That way they can definitely see those very dark ribbons of brown between every section of blonde. So right now we're just trying to do more of a piecey blonde look. So we're not doing it to be like super big, huge pieces of like chunky blonde. We're just doing it to be more defined pieces of blonde. So that's why we're going to have so many like blonde foils with the subsections in between versus having like 3 big, huge chunks of blonde sections. And then now that we got our mohawk section done, I'm taking the last 2 subsections that we did and I'm gonna back comb them, and this is gonna help bring that brightness through the ends. So that way where her foils are, that's going to blend in with the subsection to be more of like brighter through the ends. But then this next section after this, I'm not going to backcomb or do anything with that next darker piece because I want to make sure that I keep that darkness all the way through the end, so that way she has like a lot of contrast in like some of the end pieces. And then after that, I'm going to backcomb and paint the next section or two, and then leave the next section alone. That way she has that contrast through the front of her hair too. Again, depending on the look that your client wants, how I just took that last subsection and I laid it down, and then I moved forward and grabbed this next subsection, and I'm backcombing this and blonding this little piece. If somebody wants to have like more contrast and more dimension at the root area, but if they want it to be more solid down through the ends, then you could backcomb and paint every subsection blonde, but then just, you know, maybe only bring it to the midsection of the hair. Don't bring it up very high, and that will have it so where you have a lot of the darkness still showing at the roots, but then as it gets longer and towards the ends of the hair, it will all blend into like a nice soft blonde balayage, and like kind of blend together really nicely. So they'll kind of get like a nice even flow of having like nice dimension into a nice blended blonde through the ends. Now that we're done with the mohawk section, we're going to be working down the sides of the head. So we're going to be doing diagonal weaves down the sides, and we're going to be backcombing all of this, and we're going to be staggering them. So a few of the foils, we're going to go up closer to the scalp, and then maybe the next section down below that, we'll do it more just towards the midsection and the ends. And then we're also leaving a good amount of subsection in between. That way we still preserve some of the darkness, but we want to make sure that we're creating enough brightness also. And I forgot to mention earlier that I'm using Schwarzkopf Blonde Me, and I'm only using 20 volume and Olaplex in my lightener. And you'll see just how great of lift that this gets because her roots actually get really light. So that's why this is one of my favorite bleaches to use. By the way, I don't know if you can tell, but I am using an extreme amount of bleach on every foil that I'm doing. Her hair is so dark in it. I wish it showed up actually how dark it is in the video, but the light reflecting on her hair makes it look a little bit brighter. But her hair is just such a flat, dark brown. It doesn't really have much warmth to it or much, it's not like a lighter brown. It's just so dark. So to make sure that we get her hair really bright, I don't want to use like 30 or 40 volume because I feel like that's not gonna do it for me. I always like to use 20 volume when I am lifting anyone's hair. Like I rarely ever would use a stronger volume, but I definitely feel like with darker hair, using like 20 volume is the way to go because it will process longer and I'll get better even lift. But because she has such dark hair, I have to use like a very thick amount of lightener to make sure that it stays really heavy and really thick and saturated, because one of the things that happens is if you don't use enough bleach with dark hair especially, then the lightener can dry out or just stop processing, and then now the hair is going to be stuck like at an orange stage. So when I'm doing her hair, like I am using such a thick, heavy amount of bleach to make sure that there's no possible way that the bleach will dry out and that it will continue processing. So that's just one thing to always keep in mind when you're working with darker hair, is to make sure that you're using a very large amount of bleach and making sure that it coats the hair nicely, so that way you get a good even lift. Okay, now we're going to be finishing up on the sides, and so we did probably just like 3 or 4 sections of balayage or foilyage right along the sides of her head, and then now we're going to work our way to the back. And her hair is about one length, so she doesn't have a lot of layers, so we don't need to do a whole bunch of blonding pieces in the back, I don't feel like, just because she wants to keep the brightness more like around the front of her face and just a little bit more in the back. So I'm going to just really do like a few panels in the back area. That way she's gonna have a lot of dimension, but just a little bit of brightness, enough to blend with the front. And here you can see that I'm really only doing these 3 panels of balayage through the ends of her hair, and that's because the top mohawk section is going to have a lot of brightness, and that's going to lay basically on top of all of the stuff that we're doing underneath. So I know that she's still going to have a lot of blonde like in the top layer of her hair, so I don't feel like we have to overdo it in this bottom section. So this will still give her a lot of dimension, but the top part of her hair is going to have a lot of brightness. And here you can see that it's actually lifting really good, and she's probably been processing for maybe like 45 minutes to an hour at this point. So I've refreshened my bleach a few times by now just to make sure that it doesn't die down and it keeps processing really nicely. So I'm going to go through, reapply bleach to almost every foil that we've just done, just to make sure that it doesn't dry out, just make sure that it stays activated and that it keeps lifting the hair to get it as bright as we can. Now, we know because of the heat that is coming off of her scalp that the foils and the mohawk section are going to process pretty nicely, but I did tell her that it's the ends of her hair that I don't know how much we're going to be able to lift that. And then also she did have color on her ends from a long time ago where it was a little bit warmer, just like the tips of her hair. So I told her I don't know that we'll be able to get it as light on the ends as we are in the root area. But you can see there that her hair is almost like a level 9. So I mean, going from a level 2 to a level 9 in one sitting, that's pretty amazing, and her hair felt great. So we're still gonna try to lift it a little bit more just to try to get a clean blonde. So we're going to reapply bleach and then blast her with some heat just to help it process a little bit better. After I'm blasting her hair with some heat, I'm trying to take these foils that are through the ends of the hair and I'm trying to tuck them under the mohawk section, and I'm trying to have it lay underneath so that it kind of is getting more heat from her scalp. So that's something that you can always try if you worry that somebody's hair, like if the ends of someone's hair aren't lightening very good. You can always try to tuck them up underneath the foils on top of the head, or try to lay the foil, like blast them with heat, lay the foils on top of them, and that way it will preserve the warmth and try to help boost the processing a little bit better to try to get a little bit more of a lighter lift. So you can see here that the ends are still a little bit warm, probably like a level 8. So we're still going to try to lift through that and try to get her a little bit brighter. So we're going to keep reapplying, keep hitting her with the heat, and then try to tuck this underneath. And then we will put a towel over her head to try and keep that heat in, and then let her finish processing with the towel on her head for probably like maybe 30 more minutes. I mean, her ends have a little bit of warmth in them still, but like look at this lift at the roots. Like that is a clean like 9. That is amazing to get such good lift. This is why I love Blonde Me. I mean, that's like almost a level 10 right there.
So my client that's processing right now, or she's not processing, but she's sitting with some Fanola No Yellow shampoo in her hair just to try to tone out any of that brassiness that's in her hair. We were able to lift her pretty blonde, especially the foils that are like right off of her part, but the ones that fall a little bit lower through the ends are honestly still probably like level 8, 9. So I know those aren't gonna be, those are still probably gonna be kind of brassy. But I asked her if she wanted two-tone to be like cooler or to be brighter, and she wants to tone to be like as bright as blonde as possible. However, we are lifting her from like a level 2, 3. That's why I like the short scuff blondie, because it does have really great lifting power. So we did get pretty blonde, you know, at least on the top part. So I'm thinking that I'm gonna tone her with my Paul Mitchell, and I'm gonna use Paul Mitchell 8, a little bit of 8, just to try to cool down some of that brassiness, and some 9 and level 10.
And somebody walked in, and I feel like a dumbass recording when people are right there with me, but this is what I ended up using to tone her hair.
Looks so good.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Never had my hair like this good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Here's her before again, pretty natural and very dark. And then here's her after. You can see that she has those nice dimensional chunky foils, but they blend really nicely into her roots, and they aren't like too strappy or anything, but they're definitely very dimensional and high contrast. We got her pretty light, her hair toned down to be such a nice, cool ashy color. Her ends are still a little bit warm, but those will lighten over time. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, please ask me in the comment section. I know sometimes I can ramble and maybe it gets confusing, but I appreciate you taking your time to watch, and don't forget to like and subscribe.